Hello everyone, I am Majesty Kekuhuna, and today I will be presenting about Howl Pendragon, a wizard from the animated movie Howl's Moving Castle. Before I start talking about the character, I would like to give an overview of what we'll be covering throughout this presentation. Then we'll go on to cover more about the psychological aspect of this presentation, such as touching on some of the key information like the abnormality of the character's behavior. This will then be followed by identifying a specific disorder listed under the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, or the DSM-5 for short. Once we have identified the disorder, the next step would be to issue a diagnostic assessment. In other words, analyze and decide whether the character's behavior meets the criteria listed in the DSM-5. Moving on to one of the more in-depth portions of the presentation, we'll be addressing a treatment plan that will be best applied in aiding the individual suffering from the disorder, while the last aspect of the presentation will be focused on the holding environment of the character and how it will impact them during their treatment plan. Before moving on to the real content of the video, I would like to start off with this little quote from the movie, "A heart's a heavy burden." So as I've mentioned before, we'll be talking about Howl Pendragon from the 2004 film Howl's Moving Castle by Hayao Miyazaki. Strictly looking at the film, Howl is a male estimated to be about 27 years old. The film is based on a fictional town called Ingary of Kingsbury. However, he was born in Wales in the United Kingdom, thus making Howl a non-Hispanic white. He is a well-mastered wizard with a high profile. This film takes place during a war, and despite this fact, with his magical abilities, I would assume that Howl is well off in terms of finances, which also plays into his high-profile aspect of being a wizard. Aside from that, prior to meeting one of the other main characters, Sophie, Howl lives in his moving castle with Markle, a young boy studying to be his apprentice, and a fire demon by the name of Calcifer. Howl has always been an interesting character for me. Throughout the film, he has always irritated me with his actions towards others, especially when it came to his vanity. He appeared to be self-absorbed and narcissistic. One example that I found interesting illustrated Sophie cleaning and organizing his labyrinth of a house. However, she had made one mistake of mixing his potions and ruining his hair elixirs that would turn his blonde hair into an orange color. This inconvenience, as an experienced wizard, caused him to fall into a downward spiral. Here, Howl exclaims, "I see no point in living if I cannot be beautiful." Again, Miyazaki, 2004, 46-41. I viewed him as an incredibly vain individual that didn't care about anyone else. While I still believe that is true in some senses, further analyzing the film reveals that his personality is more reminiscent of cowardice, as he appears to over-dramatize every little inconvenience. This can be chalked up to a few life stressors and concerns that persist in his life. One key concern came from having his heart broken by his first love, which resulted in him giving his heart to Calcifer to make him one of the most powerful wizards there is. However, this also causes him to forfeit parts of his humanity. Howl becomes deathly afraid of not being loved or being perceived as someone who deserves love, often dependent on other people's opinions about him. He is initially depicted running from commitment and help in pursuit of happiness. However, he later embraces his indifferences with the aid of Sophie. Moving on, I'll be talking about the abnormality of Howl's behavior. Reflecting on previous lectures, we have touched on 4 components that can aid us in defining a character's abnormality, otherwise known as the 4 Ds: deviance, distress, dysfunction, maladaptive, and danger. Going over each component briefly, deviance is a behavior that is seen as different from the norm. Personal distress is a subjective feeling that something is consistently wrong. Dysfunction, maladaptive, can be described as an individual's inability to live life with functionality and thus becoming inhibited, preventing them from having the ability to work and perform socially. Finally, we have danger, which means the individual is at risk of danger to oneself or others. Kearney and Troll, 2017. Now that we have touched on these 4 components in determining abnormal behavior, it is time to apply them to our character. Howl lives in an era of industrialization, and he himself lives in a castle that is always on the move. Many aspects of the movie are meant to emulate steampunk work. From steampunk-esque boats, flying scooters, and cars, Howl's ability to live and work becomes severely impaired over the slightest inconveniences. In this instance, I'm referring to the example where his hair color is being altered. This is a form of dysfunctional maladaptive behavior. In addition to that, another form of abnormal behavior that is being exhibited by Howl is his unwillingness to grow up or mature, such as living his life as a womanizer and carelessly abandoning them when they do not meet his expectations. The Witch of the Waste is one example of his romantic endeavors, and he decided to call the relationship quits when he found her to be ugly. Historically looking at their society, he would be the male equivalent to an old maid. Howl is actually deemed a hermit in the film by a supporting character by the name of Madame Solomon. In context to the time frame that the film was based on, it is apparent that Howl exhibits deviant behavior. Finally, with the war waging, the townsfolk take the necessary precautions to keep themselves safe from danger. However, Howl purposely involves himself in hazardous activities that would otherwise end his life, such as entering the war on his own as a third party. He does not appear to have any form of self-preservation and would likely be content if one of his adventures caused him to end his life. In other instances that we notice in Howl, he returns home battered, bruised, and weak from his excursions, and actively allows himself to bleed out. He also rejects any help that Sophie tries to offer him during these times. Clearly, he poses various dangerous attributes towards himself. Next, we'll be defining a specific disorder under the DSM-5 that reflects Howl's character. Allow me to reiterate by saying that the DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. According to the DSM-5, much of the research mentioned about Howl indicates that he may suffer from bipolar 1 disorder. In order for this to be a diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder, the individual needs to experience at least one manic episode. In addition to that, they must be grouped with a hypomanic episode and a major depressive episode. The symptoms that are listed goes as follows under the diagnostic criteria. In terms of experiencing manic episodes, they consist of high levels of energy that can be described as euphoric or irritable moodiness that can sometimes impair the individual from functioning in a normal manner. In addition to that, this has to occur within at least 1 week. During this time frame, the individual may feel an unreasonable amount of superiority compared to other individuals, will engage in activities that have a large probability of resulting in harsh consequences, and they will even require less sleep to get through their day. Compared to manic episodes, hypomanic episodes are similar in symptoms. However, their longevity and severity are significantly lesser than full-blown manic episodes. In addition to that, changes in behavior are evident by others and do not impair the individual from engaging with them. Then there are major depressive episodes. From what we know about major depressive episodes is that they are typically based on a 2-week time period, and some of the symptoms include an observation that suggests that the individual experiences a depressed mood for the majority of the days to almost every day. Sometimes individuals may feel as though they are worthless and their lives are meaningless compared to others. Again, I'll reiterate that according to the DSM-5, at least one manic episode needs to occur in order for the individual to be diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. While I have gone over some of the symptoms that we'll be addressing furthermore in the next section of our presentation, I would like to highlight there are a few key symptoms that we have not touched on. One of the defining features that hasn't been touched on in manic episodes is the fact that people can be easily distracted, such as the individual may pay attention to something, then automatically jump to another topic, and then jump to another topic, and so on and so forth, without finishing what they were initially thinking. Another symptom that I don't think was touched on in terms of major depressive episodes was the constant weight loss or weight gain. Now we will be moving on to the more interesting part of the presentation, where we will be putting our psychologist skills to good use. Using the criteria from the DSM-5, I have come to the conclusion that Howl does not meet the criteria that results in the formal diagnosis of bipolar 1 disorder. Prior to taking this class, I see how his actions can be easily diagnosed as such. However, while Howl's behavior is considered to be abnormal, the key symptoms that we identify in the film do not clearly link to the key features listed in the DSM-5. This is a snippet of Howl when he is experiencing his quote manic episode unquote. In context to the movie, a lot of people can assume that Howl has a grandiose sense of self-worth, especially since he wants to be depicted as the hero to all his friends. However, I believe that this is him exhibiting a behavior that he wants to turn away from his cowardly lifestyle, and instead genuinely wants to save his friends from any danger, no longer wanting to run away. Then there are instances such as these where Howl appears to engage in dangerous activities that could potentially end his life. Again, I see a lot of misconception in terms of his actions being considered a manic episode. While it can be assumed that Howl is mainly involving himself in the war because of his own boredom, we learn as the viewer that Howl has a strong connection to the land and that he just wants to protect it. This even means fighting against his own kind, or in other words, other wizards. A final example that we see of Howl exhibiting manic episodes is his lack of sleep. Rarely do we see him sleep as the audience. Throughout the day, he is running his shop as a wizard, and throughout the night, he's fighting in the war, coming back rather beaten and tired until he has to do it all over again the next day. While it is understandable that people who experience manic episodes also have a large amount of frenzied energy that results in lesser and lesser sleep, we go back to Howl's main motivation of protecting the land, and it clearly debunks this link of him having a manic episode and the key features associated with it. With these examples alone, it appears that Howl has not exhibited any of the key features that has fallen under the bipolar 1 disorder according to the DSM-5. As the DSM-5 states, there needs to be at least one example of a manic episode in order for Howl to be diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, APA 2020. Since we have severed that connection, this would mean that Howl cannot be diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder. The next assumption that could be made is that Howl can be diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, which typically only consists of hypomania and major depressive disorder. Howl can be depicted having a hypomanic episode. However, the longevity of the episode does not meet the criteria as well, mostly only occurring within 1 day's time. One thing that I do think that is interesting to take note of is that everyone notices his changing attitude. They can clearly tell that he is experiencing some sort of frenzied energy as he begins sharing intimate details and parts of his life with other people, starting big grand moves so that they can live as normal townsfolk, and then proceeding to fight battleships that are peacefully passing over him and Sophie during a prairie scene. Howl's changes in personality and behavior are apparent to everyone around him. Then finally, we have major depressive episodes. Right off the bat, it is clear that Howl does not experience any other symptoms listed by the DSM-5 within the 2-week time frame that is being suggested. Howl appears to function like a normal wizard on a daily basis, typically tending to the shop during the day and procuring potions for the general public. While there are some instances in which Howl does exhibit depressive behavior, such as his hair color being altered, resulting in having a mental breakdown, that example does not meet the criteria that would be suggested for a major depressive episode. While he does mention that he feels as though he does not want to live if he cannot be beautiful, I believe that this is a more self-centered ideation that is typically seen in youthful individuals when their self-esteem plummets. Based on the various examples that have been compiled, I can conclude that with the lack of full-blown manic episodes, the inconsistent longevity of the hypomanic episodes, and the less than severe major depressive episodes, I do not believe that Howl fits the diagnostic criteria that would fall under the bipolar 1 disorder. While each example is reminiscent of a symptom that can be recorded in the DSM-5, the examples provided in the movie do not give a clear depiction of each criterion that was listed. In other words, Howl's behavior can be justified through other means. Hypothetically, if Howl were to be diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, how exactly would we go about the treatment plan for this character? In this case, the biological medical model would be one of the few treatment plans that can be best applied to the individual suffering from bipolar 1 disorders, specifically by prescribing mood-stabilizing medications such as lithium. The bipolar medical model consists of a psychiatrist that primarily focuses on the brain's functionality and prescribes medication that typically targets the brain's chemistry. Typically, individuals would have to be formally diagnosed by a psychiatrist and then prescribed medication such as lithium as their treatment plan. The only thing that the individual would have to do is take the medication as prescribed. While this notion is easier said than done, there have been several articles published addressing how mood stabilizers such as lithium can improve or lessen the symptoms of bipolar 1 disorder in individuals. One research article that we see consists of 32 participants that were selected with bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorders. Out of 32 patients, only 30 people had data collected from them. It appears that about 18 people were diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder, while the other 12 were diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. The age range typically was between 23 to 33 years of age. This study concludes that people with anxiety, bipolar depression, and suicidal thoughts have less severe symptoms that were associated with them. Jones 2022. In another study, Malhai et al. 2013, they did a study based on the measurement of gray matter that would appear in brain scans in individuals who took lithium and those who did not. These studies targeted specific areas of the brain that typically flared up when a person is experiencing mania, hypomania, and major depressive episodes, such as the hippocampus, amygdala, and striatum. Among the individuals that were tested, it was found that lithium had an anti-suicidal effect that also reduced the recurrent manic behavior by 40% and the risk of depression by 61%. For the most part, I have not found any studies that would consist of a comparison group. Moving on to whether or not this case would be applicable to Howl, in large portions of the characteristics that were listed in Jones 2022, Howl would be one of the few people that would perfectly fit into the description of the participants listed in the study. As we have mentioned, the individuals were anywhere between their early 20s to early 30s, while Howl is only 27 years old. These are also individuals who experience bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorder symptoms. In addition to that, a large portion of the demographic that was recorded were male, and we as the audience know that Howl identifies as male. From Howl's age to his sex, he would fit the demographic of those who experienced improved symptoms. Therefore, I expect that the results of the study can be generalized to Howl. Finally, we can move on to the character holding environment and how exactly it may help or hurt our character's ability to successfully complete the treatment. While we have established that Howl may come off as vain, especially in terms of his looks, we see through his interactions with Markle, Sophie, and even the Witch of the Waste. The character development in the film shows us, as the audience, that Howl will have a very supportive social group. In several instances where Howl is seen experiencing his major depressive episodes, we see that Markle and Sophie are quick to get him up, dressed, cleaned, and sent to bed to make sure that he was safe. From there, they also made sure that his house was clean and tidy, and that he was fed. Sophie is actually quick to pick up on a lot of Howl's abnormal behavior, such as when we see him experience his hypomanic episode. She notices that he acts differently, and she actually tries to console him. Prior to Sophie, Markle we see take care of Howl's shop, customers, and house. Another prime example of him having a good social group consists of the Witch of the Waste. While she was one of the main antagonists for Howl initially, we can see that she becomes a genuinely caring person towards him. She actually cares for Howl and his validation. She could have kept his heart with Calcifer as he was dying. However, she handed it over to Sophie in order to save Howl. In terms of Howl's holding environment specifically, we have established that Howl is a well-known wizard. However, I do not believe that his position would allow him to seek support for his symptoms. As we have established in the movie, there is a war currently taking place between the royal family wanting to recruit Howl to fight in the war, his refusal to do so, his random rendezvous with women that often leave their hearts broken, and his mysterious nature with his trickster-like actions. These all put him in a position to be severely disliked by the general public. Since a lot of the insecurities that Howl has typically revolve around his physical features and appearance, we can assume that the general public's opinion of him may greatly impact his treatment. However, if we're looking at the character development by the end of the movie, we see that he values his immediate social circle over his position or status in his holding environment. In general, Howl appears to be exhausted from the outside world and actually wishes to be alone and hide from his responsibilities, hence his castle constantly being on the run. I would say, based on the ending of the movie, Howl is in a much better position to accept the help of his inner social circle, and I do not believe that his treatment will be undermined. He no longer feels susceptible to society's expectations and standards, and is more focused on those around him. Without Howl's immediate social circle, I do not think his treatment or his disorder would have gotten any better. Instead, I believe that they would have worsened over time had he not met Sophie. In the end, I firmly believe that Howl will be able to get the treatment that he deserves and eventually recover over time. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. I just want to quickly say thank you all so much for being patient with me, and thank you guys so much for joining me on this journey of research and analysis. I did want to apologize for why it took so long for me to even get this video up. I am using new software to pretty much edit everything, and honestly, life just be happening sometimes, so I really do apologize for that. Regardless, I appreciate all of you guys for being patient with me. And this is going to be my reference page. Again, thank you so much for watching.